Whilst Nigerians continue across all walks of life, continue to groan over the Naira scarcity crisis, businesses are also counting their losses in billions, especially those within the informal sector, as the new Naira swap policy and its attendant challenges have had a ripple negative effect on the economic activities in the past weeks. The lingering scarcity of the old notes, both old and new, has caused immeasurable misery for Nigerians, hampering businesses, financial transactions, and other daily activities. It may be recalled that the central bank had last October announced a new Naira policy that will see the 200, 500, and 1,000 Naira notes redesigned and replaced with new ones. But the policy, since its inception, has caused more harm than good due to its poor implementation strategy, leading to untold hardship for the citizens and businesses across the community. With no end in sight, the big question on the lips of many Nigerians begging for answer is how long will the scarcity persist? When will this suffering end? To provide solutions to this and many others and assess the impact of this development on the economy, I'm being joined by the Chief Investment Officer, AFRINVEST West Africa, Mr. Robert Omotunde, who joins me via Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Omotunde. It's good to have you join us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Well, I'll start with the issue of the Naira redesign and, of course, the date, the deadline, which, of course, was exceeded at the time, was extended at the time. But the truth here, or what I really want to ask you, is that clearly something went wrong somewhere, because as of today, we don't have these notes available. Even the 200 Naira notes that the president on his part said he would allow to recirculate is nowhere to be found. I saw people thronging banks today, crowds of people everywhere. You see them angry. They are very, very angry. They can't access their own funds. How bad do you think? Do you think that something really went wrong with this process? And if it did, where did we get it wrong along the line? Because everyone will say, at the end of the day, there will be light at the end of the tunnel. But before we get to that end, what will happen to Nigerians?
Well, I think that, from the beginning of the announcement of this policy, we had dissected, initially when the government came up with this policy, we were told that it was to manage monetary policy. But, from a data point of view, we have analyzed that the impact this policy will have on monetary policy is muted, if at all it will have any impact. And this is analyzing from the perspective of the money in circulation vis-a-vis the aggregate money supply. I think the total money circulation as a relation to the total money supply is just about 3%. So the 3%, even if we go fully cashless, would have a very unrealistic impact, so to speak, on monetary policy. But I think as events unfolded, we have come to see that there are other reasons why the central bank, and of course in collaboration with the federal government, is pursuing this policy now. Monetary policy definitely is not, should I say, I'm trying to use my words guidedly. It's not to impact monetary policy, and I'm just speaking specifically to data. But of course, government has other intention for which this policy is being intended and being pursued. Definitely, we've not managed the situation in the best way we should have, because again, even if government just intended to make this announcement for just 3 months, maybe the awareness should have been more intense. And again, maybe it took too late before the currencies began to circulate in the system. Because I know that this currency was launched as early as December or November, if I'm correct. So if it was launched in November or December, I don't know the exact date it was launched, but I know it was launched last year. And the central bank made it much available to the system from that particular day. And they pushed so aggressively. Maybe we will not be where we are today. But like I said, I think the government has other intention for which they are trying to pursue this policy. And I think that it is also deliberate that the central bank is not printing as much of this currency. Now, they will announce to us that we are trying to go cashless and the likes. But I think that the economy over the years. I think cashless policy, we started pursuing cashless policy over 10 years ago. Since then till now, we have done very well, even if you compare us to, most developed economies. I think that from the perspective of an average Nigerian on the street who prefer to hold their currency in cash, they seem to have been, unfavored by this policy to a very large extent. And I think that if you look at the total currency in circulation, that even if the federal government was to print the 3 trillion currency in circulation, the amount that is actually needed by the small scale, medium enterprises, it's actually very minimal. If you look at it from the perspective of the proportion of Nigerians that are living below poverty line, it seems like those who actually need this currency in to hold it by hand for business transactions, if you accumulate all that they have to use, it's probably less than 3 trillion. So clearly, the central bank perhaps has not printed as much of those currencies as are needed. But I think that it's also, a way to say, it would have been more difficult if there were no alternatives for people to use. I think what this policy is forcing Nigerians to do now is to look to the alternatives. The alternative being that, you can even pay bills of 500 naira, 1,000 naira by doing a transfer. It comes at a cost, no doubt, but maybe this is the way central bank can also help to alleviate the suffering of the people by perhaps eliminating all charges that have to do with transfers below certain threshold. That maybe if you're transferring funds below 5,000, I don't know, just suggesting, maybe the central bank can take that out. Because if you look at it, if you have to buy your pepper in the market and you're paying 500 naira, with the scarcity of cash right now, you may then resort to transferring your 500 naira, or paying through a POS if the pepper seller has a POS. So I think the government is actually trying to force Nigerians to go towards that route of becoming cashless. The reason, there are positives anyways to going cashless, because you can actually track the flow of funds from one account to the other. It's one of the benefits of going cashless. But I also understand that a lot of the issues have been politicized, because of course we are in election season. I think the only thing for Nigerians to just think about is maybe we should not resort to violence. To the extent that there are means through which you can conduct your transactions, except for those who are in very extreme rural environment. And I think the central bank is also trying its best, trying to, go to those rural communities. Only that I don't know how much of impact that will make in the interim. But clearly, something went wrong in the implementation, or maybe it was all deliberate to limit the amount of currency in the system. But we have not, addressed this situation in the best way we could have, knowing that we were transitioning from old to new currency.
Thank you so much. Brilliant stuff, as usual, Mr. Omotunde. Well, you're the economist here. I'm the journalist. So I would ask you more questions, and it's going to be 2 in 1. Pushing us or trying to force us into the cashless space is a good development. But do we have that infrastructure to accommodate it? Look at what is happening in Kenya. It's so seamless, and everyone can go ahead, and people don't even really remember the use of cash anymore. Did we prepare for this well? Do we have that infrastructure? That is one. Now, we talked about politicizing this. Many have talked about it. Vote buying and all of that. Now, let's open up to ourselves. It's not only Naira that can be used to buy votes. Let's stop deceiving ourselves. We are just making, for me, I think we are kind of making people suffer. Because I see people every day, every morning at banks. They can't even gain access into the banking hall to access their hard-earned money. Mr. Omotunde, that is my worry. So can you take it up from there?
Yes, I think in terms of infrastructure, I've already alluded to the fact that perhaps the central bank did not prepare the populace ahead of this policy implementation. From an infrastructure point of view, is to ask, does individual have the requisite gadgets needed to embark on online transactions? I think I can answer that question if we look at the number of or the degree or percentage of telephoning in the country. How many Nigerians use mobile phone? And I'm not talking about smartphones, especially, particularly. Any kind of mobile phones. I think with as low as 5,000 Naira, you can procure a phone. It might not be a smartphone, definitely. And then you have all the banks have short codes, USSD codes, as we call them, that allow them, individuals to be able to transfer money from their account to, another person or for other purposes. Now, the question also is that what percentage of Nigerians are banked? The number of the banked population relative to the unbanked population. I think that's where the issue is, right? We still have some significant amount of Nigerians that are unbanked. Yes, they may have mobile phones, but because they don't have bank account, there's nothing to transfer. So naturally, they have to resort to use of cash. So that part is very, very noted in the sense that the central bank perhaps did not prepare the populace ahead of this. But I think the second leg is the political angle, which you have introduced into it. I mentioned that it perhaps has a political angle, but you mentioned it that perhaps it's linked to vote buying. That then makes me think that the process was not, maybe this policy even came up abruptly because the government is trying to achieve an objective. Perhaps it wasn't a policy that was, properly planned and thought through before it came up. And that could even be, deduced from the fact that even the currency that was redesigned, it wasn't really how do I say it now? It wasn't really a proper redesigning of the currency, so to speak. It was just a change of color, or as you call it, the ink of the Naira itself. So that could tell you that perhaps it was a hurried decision that came up to this. But because I'm an economist, I'm not going to talk about politics, but clearly we all agree that the politics of inducing voters through cash is not the best for our country if we must get the right kind of leaders. Now, that said, you also alluded to the fact that, of course, currency or cash is not the only reason, or it's not the only way through which voters can be induced. And from a reasonable point of view, I agree with you, because there are several other subtle means of inducing or influencing voters to vote in a particular way. In some instances, it might not even be cash. It might be food items, that people are sharing or distributing. It might be souvenirs in the name of campaigning. When you campaign and you make souvenirs like T-shirt, face cap, these are things that are needed for daily usage of man. So when you share those things, perhaps you could appeal to the, emotions of the individuals that are beneficiaries of those to vote. Definitely, cash is not the only means, but I think perhaps the federal government have some data that we do not know. I don't know where to check the data for vote buying. I'm not sure there is any repository of data for us to check that. But if you check the data, perhaps the federal government has it. It might be that they found out that cash is the major means through which that is done. But for us, is to analyze the economic impact of this. And you can see how this is economically impacting on the lives of people in a negative way, by the way, because those who are engaging in cash transactions, we've had reports of people who have had to shut down businesses, for the period because they could not transact in cash. And it's so bad that if you want to get something from a vendor and you do not have cash, and that vendor does not have the means to get it through alternative means, it then means that you cannot transact business. So definitely, this is having a very negative impact on the small-scale businesses. And I'm not sure that the federal government is not aware, neither is the central bank oblivious of the negative consequences of this policy in terms of how it affects the common man on the street. And I think that's why they keep, they've kept, I don't know whether it's apology now, they kept, sensitizing people and letting them know that the government understands the challenges. But I think that the government is a bit serious about pursuing this policy for whatever reason. But they definitely must be aware that it has negative impact on small-scale and medium enterprises. And then, of course, the ordinary man on the street who actually doesn't have much. Maybe all he has is actually 2,000 naira in the account, and he cannot even access it, given the level of poverty in the country. So I think those are the areas that are actually very painful in terms of how this policy has come across.
Well, finally, before I let you go, at this time, many would say the CBN has a lot to grapple with as we expect all of this to impact on coming inflation figures. What are you projecting? What are you looking at? And some would also argue that the central bank has a lot to grapple with, not all of this Naira thing, but like you said, maybe the federal government has a motive. Like the ways and means that many say is about 22 trillion Naira. The central bank talking about that and talking about just 3 trillion Naira that is in circulation. Some say we are just, I don't know. What is your reaction to all of these issues? The CBN, its responsibility with regards to all of these issues laid down and taking the Naira policy to be at the forefront.
Okay, thank you. I think on monetary policy, it is known and clear that we have often argued that this policy is not necessarily going to impact positively on monetary policy. I think one of the original reasons that were advanced by the central bank was that it will help to tame inflation. We don't think so, because again, inflation, as much as it's a monetary phenomenon, the phenomenon of money in this sense is the aggregate money supply, not just the currency in circulation. And we've analyzed that a 3 trillion relative to, close to 40 trillion of, broad money supply is not so significant, in the scheme of things. If you look at it in terms of what percentage or proportion of, cash is making up in the aggregate money supply. So that said, if you look at the, recent inflation figure where inflation came out at 21.8% as against the previous 21.4%, it can even tell you this policy has been on before this new inflation figure came up. So if it's impactful on inflation, should we not have seen some sort of moderation? We didn't see that, so that clearly speaks to the fact that this policy is not necessarily going to impact on inflation monetary policy. I have said it, and I think the statement from the president last week also can help us to towards the last part of his statement, he had mentioned that is for, for the purposes of the election. And I think beyond that, and other security measures of saying, okay, if you redesign your currency, you can reduce the incidences of kidnapping, ransom paying, and all of those other security challenges. I think this is more of a security concern than it helps to address monetary policy. The attendant impact is also the negative consequences that small scale businesses then have to suffer, and this could actually then impact on economic activities in the near term and then affect economic growth at the long run. But overall, I think that if I'm to assess the policy, implementation has not been good. And I think everybody agrees on how implementation has been flawed, on how this policy has come across. Maybe we should have had more time. Maybe, this should have been announced since mid-year so that we had at least 6 months for that transitioning. Definitely, there is not enough time. But again, I think that people are taking very good lessons such that even when the cash now becomes abundantly available, people will be used to that cashless, style of transacting business. And maybe it could help at some other point in other, monetary issues of the central bank. Thank you.
Interesting chat with you as usual, Chief Investment Officer, AFRINVEST West Africa, Mr. Robert Omotunde. Thank you so much for starting the week with us on Business Nigeria. We appreciate this.
Thank you.